Hi everyone, my name is Catherine. I'm one of the regulatory managers here in Leatherhead. My background is European, French and Canadian law, and today we are going to discuss the revision of the General Food Law and looking at the potential effects on innovation, transparency and risk assessment. So we will going to look first at what is the EU transparency and regulation. Then we will have a look at the change of the General Food Law and the other framework. Then my colleague Luc is going to talk to you through dealing with the confidential information, and then he will look into the challenging and opportunity for industry. So what is the EU transparency regulation? So you will find here a timeline showing the evolution of the General Food Law. The General Food Law has been published in 2002, and this regulation is really the foundation of all the legal measures at EU and national level in the area of food law. 12 years after its publication, the Commission have launched a fitness check of this regulation to really have a look at the effectiveness of the regulation. So as the objective of this regulation have been met, the efficiency as well of the regulation, what are the costs and benefits involved, the coherence, which means that does the policy complement other action or are there contradiction, the relevance as well, is the EU action still relevant, and also he had a look at the EU added value. So can or could similar changes have been achieved at national and regional level, or did EU action provide more clear added value? So in order to do this check, so several studies have been launched and have been completed. Another thing that have been that has an impact on the fitness of the General Food Law have been the Stop Glyphosate initiative. So this initiative has been submitted to the Commission and clearly had a huge impact on the fitness of the General Food Law. So finally, in 2018, so the Commission did have some proposal on the revision of the General Food Law, and you have in September last year the publication of the new transparency regulation, with the application of this new regulation in March 2021. So the new regulation on transparency is really a direct response to the European initiative Stop Glyphosate, and it builds on the finding of the fitness check for the General Food Law. So the Stop Glyphosate initiative, the main concern from this initiative is that there is a lack of transparency, and as well the quality. They are really concerned regarding the quality and independence of the study. So what are the findings of the fitness check of the General Food Law? So what the different studies have found is that there is no systematic failure, and that the EFSA improved the scientific basis of the EU measure, but the civil society clearly perceive a certain lack of transparency and independence, and the risk communication was not always effective enough. So the new regulation on transparency have been published in September last year, so 2019, and it will apply on the 27th March 2021. So the main aims of the regulation, of this new regulation, are really to increase the transparency of EU risk assessment, as well to closer tie between member states and EFSA, and mainly as well to improve communication to stakeholders and the public. So what this regulation changed to the General Food Law and other framework? So the regulation on transparency, so Regulation 2019-1381, is going to amend several EU regulatory frameworks. Those frameworks are, of course, the General Food Law, but is going also to have an impact and to amend the GM Food and Feed Regulation, the Feed Additive Regulation, the Smoke Flavoring Regulation, the Food Contact Material Regulation, the Food Improvement Agent Regulation, the Plant Protection Regulation, and also the Novel Food Regulation. So with this new regulation are clearly an impact of a lot of different aspects of food law. So what change bring this new regulation? So this new regulation bring change in three different aspects, so transparency, confidential information, and independence of study. So first, regarding the transparency, the change is that no citizen will have automatic access to all study and information submitted by industry when an application is validated, and citizen and stakeholder will be consulted on submitted study for new application and renewals. Then, regarding confidential information, so my colleague Luc is going to explain to you in more detail later in this presentation. So basically, the IP and data will be protected in accordance with existing legislation. Applicant may apply to retain certain confidential information. The confidential information must meet certain criteria, but ultimately EFSA decides what is confidential and what is not. Another change regarding independence of study. So EFSA will be notified when scientific studies are commissioned. A new database of study will be created. A pre-submission advice is now available. This is quite important. And EFSA can commission its own study in exceptional circumstances. And no fact-finding mission by the Commission to enforce standards will be in place.
Hello everyone, my name is Luke Murphy. I worked in the regulatory team at Leatherhead for the last 14 years. My background is European food law, and today I'm going to talk to you about dealing with confidential information under the new EU transparency framework. There are going to be some opportunities and some challenges for industry, and hopefully this part of the presentation will explain these for you. So this slide shows the summary of the basic confidentiality requirements. First of all, on the top left of the slide, generally speaking, relevant safety information will not be kept confidential. So if you're applying for a new additive to be approved, for example, and there's safety related data in there, that data is likely to be made public regardless of your wishes. So that's quite important. Then confidentiality of the technical information is going to be handled slightly differently depending on the framework you're applying under. So if you're applying for a pesticide substance or a novel food or an additive, there'll be different parts of the dossier you keep confidential in each case. And we're going to look at those examples in a bit more detail on the following slides. The third bit is interesting, and this effectively puts the requirement on industry to demonstrate to EFSA that disclosing the information will potentially harm the business's interests to a significant degree. So unless you can demonstrate that, EFSA aren't guaranteed to keep that information confidential. So that's quite important. And finally, if EFSA decides not to grant confidentiality, you do have the option of withdrawing your application before publication. So that would keep your information confidential. Of course, it would also mean you've cancelled the approval for that particular substance, additive, flavouring, etc. as well. So as Catherine's already mentioned, existing legislation around trademarks, patents, data protection still applies, irrespective of what this framework says. But there are some general rules on which parts of a dossier can be kept confidential and which can't. And these apply to all applications, be it for a pesticide or a novel food or a additive or any of those listed in the regulation. So the manufacturing process, including any innovative aspects of it, can be kept confidential, of course, but any safety elements around that probably won't be, so that's worth noting. The commercial links between a producer or importer and the applicant or authorization holder can be kept confidential if you wish, if you apply. And also information revealing the sourcing, market shares or business strategy around the application. So again, you can apply for those to be kept out of public eyes. And finally, the composition of the subject matter, except where it's relevant to safety, again, can be kept confidential. And all of this, again, requires EFSA to approve that confidentiality request. So it's not automatic, it requires EFSA to approve. There is then some extra protection available under the GMO framework. As you'd expect, the DNA sequence information can be kept confidential, except where it's relevant to detection identification, because that will need to be made public. And breeding patterns and strategies can be kept confidential as well. Under additives for animal feed, any study plans demonstrating efficacy can be kept confidential. Any specifications of the impurities and the relevant methods of analysis, except again for those that may have adverse effects on health or the environment or animal health, can be kept confidential. Under the food contact materials framework, there's a lot of information can be kept secret regarding the substances themselves used in the mixtures of plastics, for example, the material and articles in which the applicant intends to use the substance, the manufacturing methods, those mixtures, materials or articles, impurities and migration testing results, again, except when they're relevant to safety. And also the trademark under which the substance can be marketed, as well as the trade names of mixtures, materials or articles can be kept secret as well on application. Under the food improvement agents framework, so that's of course flavourings, additives and enzymes, any detailed analytical information on the variability and stability of the batches, again except for safety relevant information, information provided in detailed descriptions of starting substances and starting preparations and how they're used in manufacture, and detailed information on the nature and composition of materials or products, again except where they're relevant to safety. So you are allowed to keep some of the source material information secret, but not all of it. And for novel foods, the text is very similar to that for additives, flavourings and enzymes. Again, except for the safety information that must be made public. So for each of these frameworks, there's then a core pool of information you can apply to be kept secret, and then there's the specific cases on top of that you can add to the confidentiality request as well. And again, it's not guaranteed to be kept confidential. You have to demonstrate to EFSA that it should be kept confidential. And the final part of the presentation is around challenges and opportunities for industry. Now, it was quite easy for us to look at the challenges. We have consulted some of our blue chip clients, particularly in the regulatory functions, and got some feedback which I can share with you anonymously as well. So most of the challenges we've identified have been in the innovation area. Firstly, as Catherine's already mentioned, if companies have to publish scientific studies at the start of an application, this could give an advantage to companies outside of Europe who can then see that information and potentially piggyback the data and get something to market much quicker, perhaps in a jurisdiction where there aren't as many controls in place. And I guess linked to this, will the risks of disclosing this confidential information mean companies are more reluctant to launch first in Europe because it'll take longer and they risk exposing their confidential data in the process. So what would stop companies looking to launch in the USA first, for example? Thirdly, how does the notifier demonstrate that the confidential information, if disclosed, will harm the business to a significant degree? Because at the moment this is untested, particularly in the courts. So the threshold of proof is pretty unknown at the moment, and it seems to be EFSA alone who will make that decision. So until we really get some challenge on this and there's case law in place, we don't really know what significant degree means in this particular context of this particular regulation. Now, there may be some opportunities as well. So EFSA has been criticised in the past for being not very transparent. And this regulatory framework does officially mandate EFSA to provide pre-application advice. So in theory, companies can approach EFSA for advice before they start a full application, which could be helpful in filtering out ideas or building ideas before you're investing a lot of money in building a dossier. Then the other positive perhaps is that in theory consumers would have increased confidence and trust in the regulatory process. So the data is there for them to see, they can see how the system works, they can have access to the data, and in theory they will then trust the data. Of course, in practice it may lead to more consumer confusion, and certainly some bodies like NGOs might then be able to access the data and interpret it in their own way. So opportunities perhaps are not as thick and fast as the challenges, but there are perhaps some opportunities hidden amongst this too. So that brings us to the end of the presentation. I hope it's been useful. Please do submit your questions for the Q&A. Catherine and I look forward to answering them if we can. And if you feel like contacting us directly about any of the points in the presentation, or you require some more information, then our email addresses are there on the slide. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thanks again, everyone. We are going to start to look into the questions that have been submitted. Let me see. So I can see a question regarding the sanction. So, like, are there going to be any sanction for a non-compliant study? So this is a very good question. As you know, this legislation must be enforceable. So definitely there will be some sanction. So in fact, for any kind of applicant who will not comply with the notification obligation of commission study, what is going to happen is that there's going to be a negative temporary stop in the risk assessment of the process of the dossier, and that's how they will try to enforce this.
Okay, we've got another question here on somebody from an SME who is selling a single ingredient who might need to use this process in the near future, asking about the opportunities and challenges for them specifically. I think firstly you should still apply. The EU market is huge and there's obviously great potential here. I think there might be some challenges with confidential information, in that if you have to put your studies online, others may be able to see them. So competitors outside Europe may be able to view that, for example. And I guess the other thing is to reinforce that you need to be absolutely sure about what information you flag as confidential. So go through that, like triple check it and cover yourself in that way. Because if you're a small business selling one or two ingredients, that could be the lifeblood of your business, and you want to keep that locked down as much as possible. But yeah, I think still apply. There's obviously spoils there for people who get to the end of this process, and but there are some challenges as well.
Okay, let's have a look at another question. If I can see another one. So does this change concern as well the procedure of renewal of already authorized substance like food additive? So this is a good question, and the answer is yes. So definitely this change will also affect the renewal of authorization of substances that are already on the market. So for the renewal, the applicant will have to notify EFSA in advance of the study planned to carry out for the renewal request, along with the proposed study design. And then the EFSA will then launch a consultation of third party, so regarding this planned study. And so the EFSA will come back and provide a tailor-made advice to the applicant for the content of the renewal dossier. So it's a little bit different, but definitely you will as well need to notify EFSA for any kind of renewal authorization of substance.
Okay, there's another question about EFSA, just clarifying really why EFSA are making that decision on confidentiality themselves. I'm not sure I have all the answers on this one, but I guess in my view, EFSA already look at confidential information from dossiers anyway, so they're quite used to doing that. It does put quite a lot of pressure on them to get it right, and I think there is risk they might accidentally release confidential information, but that then leads back to the applicant and making sure that you've double checked the dossier to make sure everything is in place. And again, I don't think it should stop people from applying. I think EFSA might need to upskill a little bit. So historically, EFSA has been very good academically with people from an academic background and a very strong science background. That seems to be drifting now towards people from industry joining EFSA. I think what they need really to make this work is people with business knowledge as well as industry knowledge. So people who understand the risks to business and that sort of information very, very well. But I guess it's a challenge for them as well as for us. Hopefully they'll be able to meet it.
Okay, let's have a look. We still have a couple of questions. There is a question on regarding the pre-advice that EFSA can give you. So is this pre-advice is also going to be made public? So as Luc has explained, so you can definitely ask advice to EFSA, but this advice is really on the relevant provision and the content of the application. And this is very useful for very small businesses in order to support them in the preparation of the application. So this advice that EFSA is going to give you is definitely with not any input of the scientific panel that are in charge of the actual scientific assessment, but this advice will be made public. So that means that this advice will be very there to guide as well also applicants how to fill the application.
Someone's asking if I've got any more positives, because the slide on positives was maybe a little short. It's a fair challenge. So I think there are some people who will benefit from this new framework. Obviously, NGOs will be sort of cheering the victory. They'll be able to influence the approvals more, I think, because they'll have access to data that they perhaps wouldn't have had access to before. I think also the scientific media will be able to make a lot more noise around applications, and I guess that could be positive and negative for applicants. If the media is kind of championing you, then they could maybe have a voice around that data that's available. If not, it could be the opposite. And I think more cynically, competitors would also see an advantage here because they can again get access to the data, be they competitors in the EU or outside. So I think there will be a bit of piggybacking on the data, and it will lead to other approvals being put through on the back of existing ones quite quickly. But again, if you don't go for the application in the first place, you can't enjoy the spoils of the approval and the market, so it's still worth having a go. Okay, any more questions? I think that's it from the questions we've got. So I hope that's been useful. I think there's going to be more colour in this legislation as it develops. There's going to be more guidance published, so do keep an eye on that. As with these things, more detail comes into play towards the application date, which is March next year, so do keep an eye on it. But I also wanted to quickly mention that we've got 2 more webinars in our series. There's one next week on the 30th of September at exactly the same time on Brexit, and that's led by Oliver Leedon. And there's another one on the 7th of October, exactly the same time, 3 o'clock UK time, and that's on botanical ingredients in Europe, North America, and Asia Pacific, and that's led by Annie-Laure Robin. Thanks again for your time, and I hope you enjoyed today. And please don't hesitate to ask us by email or otherwise if you've got any more questions. Thank you.